Well, isn't this a sight for sore eyes? A mostly clean tabletop. All of that space just open with nothing there. If there is anything that just cries out for potential, it is a sight that you see here. But what am I going to go ahead and fill this space up? Because it's bugging me. I can't have an empty space like this. It's just, I got to have something occupying this space. I know. Perfect. Now that's what I'm talking about. All right. Time to make a mess again. Hey everyone, this is John from EastCoastArmory.com, and I'm here today with the project announcement video for this 1/6 scale American M4A3E2 Jumbo Sherman tank. This here is a project that not only have I always wanted to tackle since I first started working on 1/6 scale models, but this particular kit here is a project that I've been wanting to work on now since 2005. So needless to say, it's better late than never, but this is definitely going to be a project that was worth the wait specifically for me. And I can already hear you guys stomping on the keyboard in the comment section, asking yourself, John, what is this? Where did you get it? And where can I find one? And we'll be going over all of that information in this video. And you may or may not necessarily like the answers to those questions. Regardless, stay tuned because there's going to be a bunch of really cool info coming right at you. The model that you see here is being built for my own personal collection and is not for sale and or purchase. However, like I often mention in these videos, I frequently take on commission build projects from models ranging between 1/35 scale and 1/6 scale. Obviously, this one here is definitely towards the latter. However, those projects that I offer commission build services on revolve models that were of a kit form. So I don't take on scratch builds for commission builds. The amount of time and work required to go ahead and do a build like that is just not beneficial to anyone involved. So if it's a kit, like something like a 21st Century Stuart or a Dragon Sherman, that's something I'll be able to do commission build services on. And that is somewhat relevant to this particular project because this model here is a kit, and this is something I could definitely do commission builds on. However, the likelihood of that happening is very, very slim because this model here was a very limited release and produced kit and has been out of production now for over 10 years. There are a few of these floating around the 1/6 scale market. I've seen a few of them, but by and large, these are very, very rare, which makes the prospect of me doing a commission build on these highly unlikely. But why not throw it out there? If anyone does have one of these kits lying around and, you know, are looking for me to build it up, hit me up with the email address listed below, which is info@eastcoastarmory.com. These kits here are very, very precious to me personally on many levels. One of which I'm very fortunate to have one of these production kits in my collection, but I'm actually double fortunate because I have two. If anyone is a fan of the channel, again, I want to say thank you for that. And if you're not, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. It's a great way to keep in the loop of new posted content. But if you are a fan of the channel, you'll know that about 10 years ago when I first started the YouTube channel, I was actually working on a 1/6 scale M4A3E2 76 version of the Jumbo. Well, that particular project has its ties with this one over here because that model was the master that produced the following kit that you see on screen presently. So the plot definitely got a bit thicker now, didn't it? You're probably wondering, John, how did you end up with the master that produced this kit? Well, I'm the producer of the master. That's right. You see, what happened was, if we rewind our clocks back to late 2004, early 2005, I actually built a 76 version of the M4A3 Sherman. At the time, the only available option on the market was this rotomold plastic hull from a company, or I should say by a G.I. Joe collector by the name of James D. Simone. I've mentioned that name in several other videos, specifically 1/6 videos in the past, for good reason, because that individual basically created the rotomold plastic kit. And why that's relevant is because it was a great way of selling an affordable 1/6 scale tank that was a kit at the time. This was way back. 3D printing did not exist, and back then 1/6 scale, and still relatively true today, is an expensive hobby to get into. It was even more back then because the only way you can fabricate something was just by doing it the old-fashioned way. But Mr. D. Simone came up with a way to to produce large-scale models like this, but for a fraction of the cost. And to further illustrate that, here I have one of the original James D. Simone 1/6 scale Sherman tank models. This one here is all made, again, out of rotomold plastic. And this, by the way, is definitely going to be the subject matter of its own build video, or a build series, I should say, but more on that, of course, it's come at a later date. Regardless, back in 2003 or so, Mr. D. Simone released this kit over here. And these kits are extremely basic, to say the least. I mean, they are obviously just a hull, turret, and you do get some basic suspension parts, which really weren't exactly usable in my opinion. But regardless, hey, you have something to get you off the ground. These kits here sold for about $100. In contrast, the other closest competitor was a custom fiberglass tank made in the Philippines, and that thing started at about $1,000. And this, we're talking about 2003 money here, not, current, fiat money. So, talking about older fiat money. Regardless, not to get into economics, these kits here were very, very affordable. Unfortunately, they were not very popular because of the medium. And also, there was absolutely no detail accessories at the time. Back then, East Coast Armory was literally just starting out, and I didn't have any of the detail components that we have nowadays in order to trick one of these out. So the builder was on the hook for everything. And because of that, these models weren't exactly that popular at first. I saw these kits to have humongous potential to them, so I built one as a 75mm Sherman, and I went ahead and just tricked it out with all the scratchable details that I had available at the time. That was actually how ECA got started, believe it or not. I would make these parts. I decided, hey, well, why not I make some molds of them, cast the parts, and, in case I need them for other builds, and I sell them on the market, and that was how ECA got the ball rolling. Regardless, after my first attempt, or I should say my first build of one of these models, I was so happy with it, I got another one, but this one I wanted to do as a 76. So I scratch built my own T-23 turret, and that model was completed in the summer of 2003. That model is also a very special build in my collection, and that's something, I'll probably talk about later on at a future date. But regardless, to do that build, I took one of these hulls and I fabricated a brand new T-23 turret. And I went ahead, finished the model, posted on the internet chat rooms at the time, namely the 1/6 scale action figure ones. And, after it was done, it went into my collection, and that was the end of it. Well, about 2 or 3 months later, I was contacted by one of my friends by name of Plastic Panzers, that was his go-by, and he saw the model, and at the time he was actually interested in purchasing the rights from James D. Simone in order to produce and sell these models under his own brand, and that's exactly what he did. In addition to getting the rights for the Sherman, he also wanted to tool up his own version of the Jumbo. So he saw that I did the turret on the T-23 and said, hey, would you mind making us a turret so we could make a 1/6 scale jumbo kit? Now that was music to my ears, because I was actually going to go ahead and buy another one of these hulls to make my own jumbo just for my own collection. So the opportunity to go ahead and build one to make it as a master was definitely something that I was eagerly going to accept. So upon hearing that news, I went ahead, rolled up my sleeves, and began to fabricate the turret that was going to be used as the master for the new jumbo kit. And in lieu of payment, the agreement was that I get to keep the master when he's done with the mold making process, and I also get a production unit of the jumbo, again, to keep in my collection. And I went ahead and completed the turret, I want to say late winter, early spring of 2005. Well, I sent him the turret, all's fair, that's awesome, and then I didn't exactly hear from him after that part. About a year or so later, he contacted me again and reached out asking for me to, if I was interested in doing up a hull. To which I was definitely not going to turn that down. And I said, sure, send me the James D. Simone hull, like this one over here, and I'll go ahead and convert it into a jumbo. And in lieu of payment, again, I get to keep the hull, but also he sent me a Puma, or I believe it was the M26 Pershing, which I eventually built and completed, and I did the Puma also, which that's also going to be a subject matter of its own video on this channel. But regardless, 2006, I went ahead, got one of these hulls, and I retrofitted it into the jumbo, and I made the necessary modifications to it in order to make it for a jumbo, which would include adding extra armor on the sides, adding extra armor on the front, and revising the front transmission cover, making it more bulbous as it would be on the the actual Jumbo model, or I should say on the Jumbo vehicle. Some other things that I went ahead and did was I cleaned up some areas on the James D. Simone hull over here in order to just make it better with just accuracy and also make it easier to adapt to mount on the new detail components. So that all went into the hull master. I completed that summer 2006, sent the hull in, and that was the end of it. I didn't hear from at least 4 to 5 years after that. But good things definitely come to those who wait, because after a few years or so, they were able to actually get the models in production, and that is what we have right here. Of course, the man was definitely a man of his word, and after the molding was completed, he sent me both the turret and the hull masters that I assembled for him back to me, and that model was the one that was eventually built and completed and is found on the ECA channel. A little while later, he finally had the production units of the kits ready, and he sent one to me, and here it is. And this thing here has been sitting in the shop now since, I want to say, 2011 or so. So it's been here for quite a while, as you can see from the dust. Usually I do this on my 135 videos, but yeah, this thing is pretty nasty, and I kind of wish I had my gloves for this one because, oh yeah, this thing is filthy. Very, very filthy. And that's just going to make it all that much of a more satisfying build, I think. So, the kit itself, I want to say they produced maybe 10. If they made 20, I'm really doubtful. It's definitely about the 10 mark. So, like I mentioned before, very limited production. They only did one production batch of these, and one of them is fortunately in my collection. The other thing that was changed from the original concept was, like I stated before, the original concept was to make these in rotomold, which would have been light, it would have been very flexible, and it also would have been just, the same quality as we saw in the other plastic Panzer models, like their Lee, their Priest, and also, again, the Puma and Sherman. But instead of that, for one reason or another, I believe it was budgetary reasons, they went ahead and made the production units out of fiberglass. So this model here is made out of GRP fiberglass. And you'll see that once I bring the camera in closer. I believe they were going to just do an initial batch of these in fiberglass, and the second batch was going to be rotomold, but because, the molds I believe are the same, a little hazy on that. But regardless, sadly, that never happened, and these are the productions that we have here. So with that long-winded intro and thorough background out of the way, let's go ahead and actually look at what this kit gives you and exactly what the manufacturing techniques are. Okay, so you know what? I'm actually going to start with the hull, so I'm going to go ahead and remove the turret. And with the camera readjusted, you hopefully get a better view of the hull as a whole. So I just want to mention the outside is not painted. This is the white color of the GRP, or the gel coat that was used on the mold. And here you get to see the model's detailing up close. The way you see it was exactly how it was shipped. The center portion of the turret here was cut out by them. Originally, the way I designed this model, the top part here had the mantlet and the fenders integrally molded in. And this was done just to make the units easily produced. Remember, this was ideal for rotomold, which, if you get more stuff in blank areas, it makes the job a bit easier. There's also a very rudimentary front air blower here. This is definitely not going to be used, but that is supplied. As for the front fenders, the fenders were originally on these James D. Simone tanks molded on the front, like you see on this example here, and that was definitely not going to fly. I was going to amputate those promptly, and I did. But I went ahead and took the fenders, and I basically cleaned them up to make just rudimentary fenders, just so that they're supplied with the model. And here they are right here. These are not going to be used, of course, but I'm just pointing out the original kit ones. As for the mantlet, here's the mantlet right here, and this actually is going to be used on this build, and it's going to do the job pretty well, or at least from what I can tell from looking at it. It definitely has the look, the feel, and the shape of the Jumbo mantlet, even the right angle that has the downward slope. So whoever built this mantlet definitely knew what he was doing. With the unit reverse, you get to see the fiberglass weave found on the inside. Should clean up pretty well. If not, I guess 3D print will put that into it. Also on the inside here, we have some fuel caps. The reason why I went ahead and molded these separate was because the fuel caps that are originally molded onto the James D. Simone model very basic, very crude, and I always have to clean them up anyway, so I figured, you know, let me just go ahead and make them a separate part. So it makes the job of the builder much more easily done, and also it allows the aftermarket options out there to go ahead and fill in this area, which is exactly what happened. With just not both with myself, but also with a few other vendors out there. With the camera off the tripod, you really get a better idea on what exactly am I dealing with here. So here's the transmission cover. Like I mentioned before, this was the original James D. Samoan that I built up with the sculpted epoxy in order to give the bulbous look that we have here. On the top here, we have originally one of my cast resin bolt strips that was built into the master. This is something that didn't hold up quite well. As you can see, there's quite a bit of mold tearing in this section over here, and these are going to have to be cleaned out, but I think it should be giving me a good enough base to start with. Moving up takes us to the front glacis plate. This was built up to the thickness that we have here, and I also went ahead and did the cutout for the bow MG. This is going to be revised as even though it is the right shape, it just could be a little bit more improved and just made a little bit more symmetrical, but again, more information on that is to come. On the side portions here of the hull, I went ahead and added the extra armor plate that goes throughout the entire length of the vehicle. And you can see I went ahead and sculpted on some well beads in these sections over here. And I did the double row of well beads found on the top portion, which would be present on a Jumbo. On the front hatch area, you can see that the hatch sections have been plugged up. These are going to be opened up in order to actually make the hatches. I do have hatches for James D. Samoan Shermans. They're old school cast resin, and it looks like I'm going to be dusting off my molds to go ahead and do this one. The antenna plate over here is, you know, stock. Again, these rotomold tanks were not really well known for their crisp detailing, so, you know, you're going to see a lot of amorphous details on the surface areas, and that was just, you know, what we live with at the time. Obviously, things like this I would, you know, replace and revise with new scratchbook ones or aftermarket ones, but, you know, you'll see what that looks like as the video goes on. Here we have the old school ECA front periscopes. These have been retired, and I now have these in 3D printed, but you can see what the old ones look like molded in place. Over here is where the front blower is going to go. I purposely left that off because, again, this was a bit of a pain on the old D. Samoan Shermans in order to cut out and sand down, and having that piece omitted just makes the job easier for me to just drop in a new ECA one. The bulbous area here was also refined. The original JD one had a large chunk of plastic mold in here to have the hinge in a very simple manner. That was revised in order to make the piece a little bit more prototypical. Again, when I go ahead and go through the motions of installing the hatch, I'm definitely going to be revising that. Carrying on to the side section over here, you can see the fuel cap areas. Pretty basic, but most importantly cleaned off, squared away. The same is also true for back here. Of course, we have the fuel cap for the auxiliary generator, the fire extinguisher handles, as well as the rear blower. These were originally molded into the James D. Samoan model, as you can see from the James D. Samoan example that I have right over here. And yeah, so needless to say, I was definitely going to address that and make sure the area is nice and flattened and cleaned off so that the individual who is building this can go ahead and really mount on some better detailing. Here we have the blower on the front, the original periscope covers, as well as that big clunky hinge I was referencing earlier. Moving rearward takes us to the engine grills. These are stock James D. Samoan. I didn't do anything to them. The way you see it was exactly left the same on the James D. Samoan model. In the years that came after this era here, yeah, let's just say I'm going to be opening those up and revising that. Rear plate, nothing really much to go by. It was just a smooth area. On the bottom portion here, this is where, again, some slight modifications were made. The James D. Samoan one had these two gigantic lumps of plastic molded in these two sections over here, which were to be used as idler mounts, or gives you a provision to bolt the idler wheel directly to the hull. Not a bad idea for simplicity, but yeah, let's just, you know, say that was something that was amiss. So I went ahead and I actually amputated the whole rear plate out, and this was something I did on my James D. Samoans and Plastic Panthers for the same reasons. I would go ahead and amputate the whole section out, replace it with a new panel, and then I would go ahead and flesh out the details. The details you see here, like for the locations for the rear exhaust manifold as well as the rear hatch, were just cobbled together out of some very basic pieces of sheet styrene just to give you the overall look. Obviously, they were just there to give you something. These are going to be revised when the build actually commences. The underside here is solid. This needs to be extended, as the M4A3 did have extenders in these sections over here, but I'll touch upon that when I get to that aspect of the build. The other thing that I went ahead and took care of on the James DeSimone, and this was, again, probably one of the biggest dings on the JD kit, was that the transmission cover and the sidewall were flat. They were even with each other, and we had these 3 suggestion points molded in order to give you an idea exactly on where the suspension goes. In fact, here we have it right here. So, like I mentioned before, these are the 3 areas that stood out from the hull. And also, as a real quick recap, you get to see the rear section, as I referenced before. Yeah, you can see why I would go ahead and just amputate this off in order to make the model just better for me to work on from there. But regardless, here you get to see, again, the area on the hull, and on the Sherman, it's very distinctive where the transmission cover here is sunk into the hull plates, leaving it for the appearance that we have here. Now, whenever I work on a rotomold model, I just skin these areas over here with panels of plywood or plastic. The plywood then is treated with fiberglass resin, but regardless, that gives you the illusion that the hull does have the proper indent to it, and the hull is now more accurate and it's ready for the suspension in that regard. On the Jumbo Master here, that's exactly what I did. And you can probably see some of the nails from where I nailed the panels to the hull in the molding. But as you can see, this here has a much more proper look for a Sherman's lower hull. Probably the biggest quirk about the James DeSimone Sherman was what I refer to as the Flintstones mobile bottom section. As you can see, there is no bottom portion found on the old school James DeSimone Shermans, and the reason is because the bottom area here was used as real estate for him to mold on many of the other fittings that are required to flesh the model out, much as along the lines I mentioned before with the inner turret area. It's kind of where I got the idea from. He went ahead and had several details molded on, like the rear idlers, the track racks, as well as also that rear folding rack. And all those bits of equipment would be molded in this big chunk over here. So when you bought the model, he would go ahead and amputate these sections out, and you would get the model in this type of format. He also used the center portion of the turret too for other bits of equipment. I believe they were used for the hatches or other things. It doesn't really matter right now, but regardless, you can see how this is something that you can potentially turn off certain customers out there who are really used to working on like vehicles like the 21st Century Stuart, or also some of the custom tanks coming out of the Philippines. These models here were definitely a handyman special, but as I mentioned before, I absolutely love them. They were really fun to build, and I still have a very special place in my heart for these rotomold tanks. Yes, I do. They're very fun. They're very fun projects for me. I just took to it like a duck to water. But anyway, so obviously this was something that I was going to revise on the Jumbo Master, and with the model flipped over, you get to see exactly what I did. So again, this was just done as a simple way just to seal the bottom off. I took a panel of plastic sheet and I just bolted it, literally screwed it to the bottom portion here of the model. On later James DeSimone builds, I would just use a panel of plywood, and then the whole air is actually boxed in very well, and it's, you know, that's something again to talk about in another video. Regardless, you can see how much better the hull is though by having the bottom section filled out. As a quick why not, I went ahead and integrally molded on the hatches that we have over here. These were intended for you to cut them out and use them much along the lines as the original James DeSimone one did. And again, this was done by request from Plastic Panzers, as they were looking to have the thing as affordable as possible. And so, you know, I went ahead and gave them the real basic hatches that you see here. Realistically, no, you're not supposed to use those. In fact, I'm probably going to go ahead and plate over the whole bottom so I could properly detail the bottom portion of this vehicle to what would be expected for a A3 Sherman. And something really, really cool, if you ever find one of these kits out there, you'll see over here on the bottom of the transmission cover, I actually signed it. So there's me, there's the date, and there's ECA. So, yep, there it is right there in all of its glory. Also on the inside here, we have the original, or what's supposed to be the fire extinguisher, as well as the rear blower. Again, these were just mounted on the center portion here to give you something, but most importantly, you don't have to use them. That's why they're on the portion over here that gets, you know, cut out and tossed anyway. So if you want to save some money, you could use them. Otherwise, you know, you could go ahead and replace those with better detailed parts. Back to the inside, here you get to see the manufacturing method used for this kit here. Like I stated before, it's fiberglass, and you can see the weave now on the inside. And the funny thing is, when I first got this kit over here, it always reminded me of, like, they use Ace bandage as opposed to fiberglass in order to craft this model, or it looks kind of like burlap. I don't know, it's pretty interesting. I never really seen that on fiberglass GRP models before. I've seen and worked on a few other fiberglass models, namely radar control submarines and such, and their hulls were a different weave than this one here. We do have this, like, red Bondo stuff on the inside. So, yeah, that's, you know, something, that's a data point, just wanted to mention. And that's all there is to mention about the hull, and this brings us to the turret. And the turret was originally fabricated using the plank and frame method, where it was all bulkheads made out of 1/4-inch thick Luvon that were then skinned with sheet metal to give you the shape, and then the remaining of the sculpted areas were done with body filler as well as sculptable epoxies. When everything was said and done, you know, you get the look of the Jumbo's T-23-ish pattern of turret. And by the way, I just want to point out, no, this turret and the 76mm turret on the Shermans are not the same. They look the same. They actually have the same trunnion, and they could use, and the mantlets are based on each other, but the remainder of the turret is not the same as a standard 76 Sherman. It's a completely different animal. Visually, they look the same. That's exactly where they end. But with that quick little rant, I know I'm going to be revisiting when I get to the turret later on in the series, out of the way, this brings us to the, you know, actual shape of the model itself. So you get to see the front area over here. I had some cast texturing, or I should say some cast numbers integrally molded in. Pretty forward thinking. We have here the scope here on the top for the loader, searchlight mounts, gunner's optic. We have that distinctive weld bead that runs all along the side portions of the turret. We have here the loader's hatch. And we have the commander's cupola. The commander's cupola was actually an East Coast Armory cast resin unit that was just dropped directly onto the master and was molded in. This is the Generation 1 commander's cupola that I designed and was casting back in 2004. It's actually one of the very first cast resin items found on the ECA catalog. It's long since out of production, and the current iteration is actually improved off of this one over here, and that's the one that's been on the ECA catalog now since 2007 and onward. Eventually I am going to retire it, but for the time being, you know, it still does the job pretty well. It's way better than this one. This one is very, very crude, very, very reminiscent of the tooling that and the skill level that I had back during that era. But, you know, it definitely has the look and shape of the late pattern panoramic view cupola. This is not going to stay on this build, by the way. I'm going to amputate that off, but at least you get one last good look at it in this current configuration. Over here we have the provision for mounting on the retracting pedestal base for the Browning. You can see a basic hinge section here for the loader's hatch. And on the back, there's no blower or any other type of detailing that's integrally molded on, because, again, of the way this thing had to be molded, I couldn't exactly have that detailing in place. So it was intended to be a separate bit of detailing that you glue in. With the way the mold is, you can see it's an upper and lower half. Here you can see the mold cut line, which the funny thing is, this is actually very reminiscent of the real Shermans. If you look at the real Sherman that I've done a walk around on, you'll see similar type of features like this on that vehicle and how the molds lined up. So this is an interesting thing to mention. And oh boy, I remember sculpting this. That was actually probably one of the most difficult aspects. It took me a few attempts to build it up to the to the shape that you see here. But yeah, Shermans are fun. Anyway, so the one other thing that's missing you'll see are the trunnion mounts here and here. Those were, again, separate parts that you would bolt on, and then you would be able to fasten the mantlet in place. On the turret's bottom, he extended the neck and added what appears to be a Formica plate. That's a bit interesting. Originally, I did have some other equipment integrally molded onto the bottom of the turret, on the master anyhow, but for this one here, they just molded on this giant Formica plate for reasons that are unknown. I'm not going to mess with it because I actually need to drill a hole in the middle over here, and that's how I'm going to fasten the turret to the body. So, you know, it's to win, or happy accident in that regard. So that's really all there is. Obviously, I have quite a bit of intimate knowledge with this particular kit here for reasons that should be obvious. The one thing I do also want to mention, again, when these kits finally entered in production, they made very, very few numbers of them, and basically they all sold out. So if you're anticipating Battleground vehicles to dig these old molds up, I severely doubt that's going to happen. But hey, stranger things have happened, and if you know their website, which used to be up, but for some reason, for a while, I've been having trouble finding it. The owner goes to all the local, or he did go to all the local G.I. Joe shows in the Bay Area. So he was really selling these things, you know, the boomer method, basically out of the back of his minivan. But yeah, if anyone has contact with them and you're interested in starting up the production again, you know, hit him up. It's definitely he definitely has some really interesting kits. They did also, by the way, the M10. I built about 3 of them. Those were all Battleground vehicle models, and they were absolutely incredible to work on. Yeah. You know, they do have quite an interesting range of models. They did at their peak in the, you know, or late 2000s time frame. 2010s, that's when, you know, the hobby started changing, the recession hit, and they're still around, limping around. So if you, again, he likes to sell his stuff out of the back of his trunk at G.I. Joe shows. You know, hit him up if you ever see him. All right, let me just hold it right there. This is post-production John talking. After I filmed this video, I actually reached out to the owner of Battleground Vehicles, and I actually had a cool conversation with the guy. Him and I go back a little bit, and, you know, I was talking to him about this project here, as well as a few other ones I have in the lineup, and I asked him about the URL because the older links I had weren't working. And he told me that the website is still up, and the URL changed, and the URL that is currently active is found listed below, as well as a direct link can also be found in the video description. As a side note, I also asked him, you know, what type of kits he has on hand, and he told me he just did a restock of a number of them. Sadly, the Jumbo is not one of those, but he did restock, I believe, on his M10s, his Shermans, the M4A3E2 I think is also one of them, Puma, and I want to say his Panther. So I'm a little hazy on the topic. It's been a few days since I chatted with the dude. But regardless, if you are curious what he does have, the links are found listed below. And, you know, tell him John from ECA sent you. Regardless, so these things, again, they entered into production, and they were this GRP material instead of the rotomold. And the one thing that I immediately noticed was how heavy this model is. This thing, with the turret on, weighs about 30, maybe 40 pounds naked. That's not with the suspension, the track, and everything else that's going to be added to this model. That always just bumps up the weight, which for me, it's not a problem. I always say if you're building a 1/6 scale model and it's light, you're doing it wrong, okay? These 1/6 scale tanks specifically, they're heavy. There's just no way around it. With the amount of material used to make the running gear, and specifically the old school days with resin, these things would weigh in at an excess of 80 plus pounds. It would be a good day if your model weighed in about 40 or 50. That's like, wow, this thing's actually a featherweight, you know? But I remember always a lot of people complaining, not necessarily on this one, but some other people were complaining, oh, that model, yeah, it weighs so heavy, it weighs 80 pounds. Like, bro, you're doing it wrong if you're wanting it light, you know? That's just you know, the nature of the beast. You know, I built Armortex. The King Tiger weighs like 300 or 400 pounds. So, you know, 80 pounds is really nothing. Oh, the other thing I want to mention is that this model is being built as static. I'm not making it radio controlled, so if you're expecting me to RC convert this, yeah, you're not going to be happy with the series. Bumboyosh, there's a lot of other YouTubers out there that are doing RC builds in large scale. This one here is going to be solely a static build. Of course, it's going to be completely outrigged, full ECA treatment, just like all the other builds found on this channel. I would never do things any other way. So you're going to see all of the ECA detail components getting fitted to this build. One of the other reasons why I'm taking this build on is because there are a number of legacy items still on the catalog that I've had my eye on phasing out now for a number of years and replacing them with a 3D printed counterpart. And this build over here gives me the opportunity to really modernize the catalog, replace and retire many of the older components that are still in production, and revise those with ones that are, you know, more up to date with modern tooling and modern manufacturing, which means 3D printing. All the resin stuff that was once resin, a good chunk of them are already obsolete and have been phased out. But there are a few holdouts, and I'm going to be getting to them and promptly, you know, having them right off into the sunset. But more information on that is to come as the build progresses. So needless to say, this is going to be a build that I am going to have an absolute blast working on. And I am really looking forward to bringing you guys all updates on the various details that are going to be added, as well as also taking you all along from the start all the way up to completion. And with that, that wraps up this project start video for the Battleground Vehicles 1/6 scale M4A3E2 Jumbo Sherman tank. If you like this video, be sure to subscribe to this channel, where it's a great way to keep up to date on new posted content, being updates for this particular build over here, as well as the other smaller and larger scale build updates and model showcase videos that frequently get posted to this channel. Another way to keep in loop with new posted content is by liking us on Facebook. There, I have more photographs of this particular build, as well as the other larger and smaller scale builds that have been seen on this channel previously. Furthermore, don't forget to swing by eastcoastarmory.com for more 1/6 and 1/16 scale builds and detail components. Thanks again. I'll be seeing you all again on the next one. Take care.